Welcome and hello, MACC members. I'm Laurel Hansen, MACC's Program and Member Engagement Manager. And welcome to Ask MACC, the Workforce Edition, brought to you by the Metropolitan Alliance of Connected Communities. We know our network is faced with ongoing and incredible challenges when it comes to workforce. And our workforce is how we provide our valuable services to the community. But our workforce challenges can really create some difficult hurdles for our organizations to operate sustainably. And they can be complex and seemingly insurmountable barriers to deal with. And that's why at MACC we launched the Workforce Solutions Initiative. And that includes these bite-sized recorded conversations about workforce issues, which along with the resources that are available in MACC's Workforce Solutions Hub are available to all MACC members. Now, during this brief conversation, I'm joined by Alfonso Wenker, co-founder and president of Team Dynamics. Thanks for joining me today, Alfonso.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. We've been lucky to partner with you several times, bringing Team Dynamics thought leadership together with the MACC network of human service nonprofits. It's been incredibly beneficial to MACC members. We've heard about it over and over again. But this is the first time you and I have had the chance to chat one-to-one, and I've really been looking forward to it. So thanks again.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna dive right in because we have a lot to talk about. Your most recent workshop with MACC members, it focuses on power dynamics in the workplace. And so my first question for you is, to just tell us a little bit about what ways you have noticed a change in how power is considered in the workplace today. Have you noticed shifts in workplace culture that have affected how today's leaders use their power?
I'm definitely noticing maybe it's a revived, maybe it's a new, maybe it's a higher volume conversation about power dynamics. So what's always been true inside of nonprofits is that power is present. And one of the things we talk about in the workshop is power is always present. And what we haven't been so good about is navigating that power. So what we're seeing is folks are noticing power more and they're feeling the impact of power more. But our organizations aren't practiced having a direct, open, and creative conversation about power dynamics in our workplace. And so oftentimes we treat that phrase power dynamics like power is bad. One of the things we get into in the workshop is power isn't bad, but we've for so long not engaged it, navigated it well, talked about how to share it, talked about how to build it, talked about how to move where it's concentrated, that most of us remember, think about, and begin a conversation about power from a negative place. We have a lot of experiences of abuse of power, right? And so, if I were to ask you right now, tell me what you think about power in organizations, you'd probably think of a negative story first. And so what we're trying to do is harness the energy of that conversation where folks are really pointing at power and saying there's an imbalance, it's too concentrated, we're not sharing it, and saying, well, first let's get more aware of the kinds of power we all have, and then let's have a bigger conversation about how to use it well in our organizations.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And if you were to ask a nonprofit about power, they would immediately go to how they feel as a sector. They lack the power to both compete on in the workforce with the workplaces, but then also just in the work that they do in the community, they feel that power imbalance. So yeah, it's external and it's internal. It flows both ways.
Yeah, and there's actually research that shows that psychologically, we tend to think more about the power that we don't have. And so we end up giving up. Yeah, we end up giving up the power that we do have. Now, I'm not saying there aren't philanthropic, government, public policy forces at play that are really limiting how creative nonprofits can be with their workforce and workforce development. And I think we should be having a conversation about how will we use our collective power in the nonprofit space to influence. And when we do the workshop, we define power as the ability to influence. And so when we only talk about the power we don't have, we
Mhm.
take away the fact that what we do have are a lot of different ways to influence. And if we were to influence collectively, I think we could shift some of those dynamics that limit our creativity when it comes to workforce in the sector.
Wow, that sounds right on. I really agree with that. It's so true. Um, so that that kind of leads me to think about we hear from our nonprofit members, and we talked about competition in the marketplace, and we hear that it's hard to compete. It's hard to compete with other sectors in particular for workforce. And I don't know if you saw it, there was just a front page story in the Star Tribune about this, a big story about the nonprofit workforce, the crisis that's going on. Um, so so our member organizations, that's one of the first things they ask: how can I compete? How can we compete? So I'm coming to you today, asking if you what you would suggest organizations is, are there adaptations they can make or things they can enhance to really maximize their ability to be competitive in the marketplace for employees? And competitive is another one of those words that people might see negatively, but at the end of the day, they have positions they need to fill because they have services they need to provide. So yeah, what do you have
Yeah.
to say about that?
Yeah, I think, I appreciate you pointing at the word competition or competitive. I think that's one of the challenges that we have as nonprofits is we get talked about, or we talk about ourselves as against or juxtaposed or compare and contrast to other sectors. And what's currently true in the American economy is we have a structure where government, nonprofit, business, philanthropy, depending on how many legs of the stool people visualize, right? Currently, the way we take care of each other is through a nonprofit infrastructure.
Yep.
In the American economy, the government has said that's not our responsibility, it's somebody else's. And so we're not in competition. What we need is all three or four of those legs to be healthy and be doing well. And unfortunately, wealth or resources or where cash flows has tended to be concentrated in only some of those locations. And I think we do a disservice to ourselves when we say we're competing, because if we were as inflated as the business sector was, then we wouldn't have the business sector to have the jobs that it has. So I think what
Mhm.
we need to be looking for is a narrative that is about, we need to bring the social sector economy into balance so that we can pay people really well with really good benefits, so that we don't exacerbate the very issues that our organizations are set up to mitigate.
Yeah,
So that's a
that
whole
is that
framing
is the
piece,
core. Absolutely,
right?
you are
That's
on
the
it.
core.
Mhm.
I would say there is this sentiment in so many of our organizations that we have to serve as many people as possible because the problems are growing, the numbers are growing. And I don't know, I'm going to say something I don't think I've said on the record much or at
Uh-oh,
all, which is
uh-oh, here we go.
I don't know that we can serve more people and take good care of our staff.
We are at that place. In fact,
Yeah.
our members are saying that, and our members are trying to express that to their government partners and philanthropic partners as well. Um, because yeah, it's kind of we're at a standstill here with this issue.
Right. Like, and if we're not well, we're probably not providing as relevant, competent, equitable, accessible services as we can. And so I think that there needs to be a conversation among organizations that says, what is the realistic number of people, or what is the realistic amount of service or offering we can provide,
Mhm.
um, after we've said this is our workforce and this is how we can take care of our workforce.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to take some kind of resistance and reframing
Mm.
to long held notions around how we use our money. And I don't know exactly what those are, but I think too often I'm in groups where we talk about what we've always done and how
Mhm.
it has been, and our
Mhm.
commitment to being um, scrappy and our avoidance of abundance and our avoidance of like this notion like we have to put in the dues or that this work should somehow be harder than other jobs. And so I don't know what is, but I think it's a change in how we have to start talking to each other differently about these problems.
Yeah,
and MACC members have probably heard me say that part before.
Yeah, maybe. I'm going to needlepoint on a pillow, resistance and reframing, because that really is going to have to be the battle. Well, I don't use that language either, but that's going to have to be our collective cry of, the direction that we're going. And I'm here to say the avoidance that might come with Minnesota Nice, we've tiptoed into, trying to have these conversations with some partners in the community, and I won't name names today, but they don't love it. And we got to get maybe okay with, their resistance to hearing the truth from our sector, because that's a barrier for us.
Yeah, we've got to move away from any of us thinking we know better than each other, whether it's a government agency at the state, whether it's a program officer at a foundation, whether it's an executive director, a frontline program worker, community organizer, a street outreach person. I think we tend to talk to all of those different stakeholders like we know better. The truth is, all of those people know different. And we don't have a conversation that says there's a part that I know and there's a part that you know, and I wonder where we could head together. We tend to arrive at, I know better than you because of where I sit in the sector or in the ecosystem. And I think that limits us from also having this abundance conversation. And I don't know, like, I think
that's good wisdom, by the way. That is good wisdom right there.
It's,
because we're all people.
Yeah, right. We don't talk to each other very well. Like, we have hearts and a full human experience. We talk to each other like we're ideas.
Yeah. Oh my word. It feels like we're in the midst of some real major workplace shifts, right? Cultural, generational, societal. It just it feels that way. I'm assuming it is that way. How would you describe what you're seeing among workers and workplaces?
Yeah, I think we are somewhere in some kind of revolution. And I think when we look back 10 and 20 years. Well, we wrote the book, Trina and I wrote that book, Hiring Revolution, somewhat to instigate a revolution, but somewhat to just acknowledge that what we're in is a turning point. And I am hopeful that we all stop digging our heels in and trying to return. I don't know what we're trying to return to. We're trying to get back to something. And I hope we say, oh, well, even if we were to go back, it wasn't that great. So how could we be different next? And that just keeps being the question is, if this is our current reality, what's true now? What can we do next? Rather than saying, I have this nostalgic pull toward a before what? And was it really better? Or were people just not, for example, talking to you about challenging the power that you have?
Yeah. I don't think it was better. I don't think it was better for workers or the workplace. So, yeah. I'd like to come back to that topic of power. I've talked about how we not only want our leaders to use power effectively, but we also want our human services to find and use their power in a positive way. And too often our human service organizations feel a little taken advantage of, I think, by a public that is kind of stuck in that old thinking of charity work. And I think they just feel like at a disadvantage. And so power must be part of the solution. How can we use it as a force for the greater good?
Yeah, I think we need to be, to the extent that it's possible, and I understand folks in the human services realm are incredibly busy And I wonder if through vehicles like MACC, we can be pushing a public narrative and really pushing back, for example, on our local newspaper when they talk about us in ways that they're talking about something that's true, and then they frame it in a way that actually harms us. And so, what is our role in the sector to disseminate a worldview that really talks about our necessity, our relevance, and then also talking about the dignity and humanity of the communities that we are serving? Um, there's a piece that's maybe 20 years old now from the group called Grassroots Policy Project. And they talk about what they call the three faces of power. And how do you build a movement? You wage campaigns, and often we think electoral, but campaigns can be just initiatives. So that's one face. The other face of power is you disseminate a transformational worldview. So right now, the worldview of human services is not one I think we in the nonprofit sector have claimed and done from a place of asset and abundance. We've been sort of toppled in a lot of ways. So I think there's that piece. And then the third is you build infrastructure. Well, we have the infrastructure. And so is there a transformational worldview that through coalition, we can disseminate about who we are and how we are, and really disrupt this belief that anybody who isn't, I shouldn't say anybody, that folks that are trying to have a conversation about us really far away from us is likely missing the mark and is not seeing the full picture. And I think there's some worldview narrative work to be done.
Yeah. And who better to do that than a network of people with a collective voice?
Right.
MACC is now 60 human service nonprofit organizations. So there's a lot of strong voices and a lot of wisdom in that network as well. So, and thank you for mentioning that resource. I'm going to look into that and share that with our members as well. Sounds interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You and your work with Team Dynamics, you work with a lot of organizations and you do a lot of thinking and writing about the workplace and workforces and these issues. And I guess I'm asking you here maybe to spill the tea a little bit. Like, can you think of a story or an example of an organization that you've encountered? Maybe you've worked with them, and have they been able to make changes or adaptations that have made their world better? Got any examples you can throw out to us?
It's a really good question. Most of our clients don't want us talking about them.
Yeah,
I think I can. I think I can tell a story about a group that is not based in the Twin Cities without naming them.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the conversations that's happening inside of our nonprofits is people feeling powerless or disempowered by the way that decision-making and hierarchy play out. And when we met this arts organization, I would say their staff was fairly disillusioned and didn't have a lot of belief that they could feel empowered as a full team. And through a series of really deep and complex conversations about power, about influence, about talking to each other, not like we're better or that we're wrong, but talking to each other like we are the multiple pieces of a puzzle or multiple pieces of an organization. They really have been able to make a shift from talking at and about each other like they're opposite or opposed to talking with each other about, well, this is the kind of power and influence I have. Well, this is the kind of power and influence I have, and really using a structure of lead, contribute, and follow. When we do the workshop, we talk about the fact that in the US, we over-index on a couple of kinds of power. One is positionality. So where am I in the hierarchy? And the higher up in the hierarchy, we defer to level just because it's higher. And then we also defer to someone who's labeled as expert because they have an advanced degree or they've been published. I'm not saying presidents, CEOs, executive directors shouldn't make decisions. I'm not saying people who've deeply studied something and are expert on it shouldn't weigh in. We defer to those folks as though they see all the vantage points. So we forget to think about relationship. We forget to think about know-how. We forget to think about the ways in which people can give or take away access to something. And so this organization started in every conversation talking about, given the kinds of power we each have, who's leading, who's contributing, and who's following. And even the CEO and even the expert are sometimes in the follow category. And that is, I think, a really humbling conversation for all of us to have, because our history, our tradition, our norms, or just our unchecked patterns have been to defer to hierarchical structure, even when there's a kind of influence or a kind of power that might give us a more creative or more strategic solution to something.
Yeah. What a great example. I appreciate your sharing that. And yeah, when we talk about shifting workplaces, I definitely see that as, one of the indicators that we're seeing is the change in that sort of hierarchical patterns and how people relate to each other. And it's interesting how it can be a learned skill, because you have to unlearn something that we've been a part of for decades and decades of leadership. Yeah.
And it can feel strange at first, because it's often, it's what we've always done. And it's, for a lot of us, it's how we've gotten as far as we've gotten in our career in the sector. So it can feel really vulnerable to say, we're going to start doing something that is really unfamiliar, and to engage that lack of familiarity not as necessarily bad, but just as different. And there's so much about us that as humans are so resistant to doing something different because we don't want to be seen as doing it bad. So there's a vulnerability that's required in having those kinds of conversations on a team.
Yeah, a little bit of a release of control too, which honestly, there's a positive side to that, because being the feeling of always needing to be the one in control is a road to burnout.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yes.
So anyway, this has really been a fascinating conversation. And before we wrap, I lastly want to ask you if you would just tell us a little bit more about team dynamics and why your organization should be on people's radar.
Yeah, so Trina Olson and I are facilitators, coaches, strategists, and we support individual leaders through coaching. So we do a lot of executive coaching, we do team coaching, and then we do full organizational facilitation and training work. And really, it's about helping people reflect on their values, look at their behaviors and policies, and try to match those things. What's true in most of our organizations, we say we're pursuing equity and inclusion, and our behaviors and our policies don't match those commitments. And so that's our work, is to be right next to you as a critical friend, saying, hey, there's different choices you can make, whether we do that through coaching, small group work, or full organizational work.
Awesome. Well, and we gave a shout out to your awesome book, Hiring Revolution, and really want to recommend everyone check that out as well. I know that at MACC we've gotten a lot out of devouring that particular thought leadership. So I appreciate all your sharing with us today.
Of course.
And being a part of this bite-sized conversation that we're calling the MACC podcast, if you will. Unfortunately, it's all the time we have today for our discussion. Time's flown by, but it's been really interesting, and I appreciate your time and your insights, Alfonso. Thank you so much. It's great to have inspiring partners like you and Team Dynamics with the MACC Network. MACC members, you're encouraged to visit the MACC website and check out this Ask MACC Workforce Solutions initiative that we have with all sorts of available resources and more in this series of recorded conversations as well. So keep in touch. We're here to support you and our network of MACC members, and thanks everyone. Have a great day and be well.